Ch.46, Enraged Nan Yang, fist fight with Xuan Zheng. Although the words were an understatement, lightly said, it caused all those around to take in a harsh breath. Many had in their minds, "You're nothing more than a powerless rubbish god, how could you be so shameless to say to the one Lang Qianchu, martial god of the East, that if you fight, he'll die for sure. What arrogance!" It was like the request for banishment was because fighting Lang Qianchu was beneath him. Pure bullshit. Yet Lang Qianchu didn't think his words were exaggerated at all. "I said, life and death don't matter. I don't need you to let me off easy either." Si Lian ignored him and reiterated his request to Jun Wu, "Pray my lord banish me to the lesser realm." Tgcf suddenly raised his arm. "Wait. I have more to say." "Speak, Wind Master," Jun Wu said. Everyone here seemed to think His Highness Xianlei spilt the blood of Yong'an royalty for revenge. Yet, if it was revenge, then why did he let the Crown Prince of Yong'an, His Highness Tai Hua, go? Logically, the one an avenger would want to cut down the most should be the Crown Prince himself, am I wrong? It wasn't that no one had thought of this detail, but no one had thought it necessary to voice it either. Now that the Wind Master took the lead, some nodded their heads in agreement. Tgcf continued, "His Highness and I haven't known each other for long, but I did see with my own eyes him fighting head-on against the scimitar Yiming in order to protect His Highness Tai Hua. Qianchu, if he regarded the Yong'an monarchy with hatred, why would he unnecessarily defend you against the blade?" Hearing that Si Lian faced Yiming head-on, both Feng Xin and Mu Qin stared at Si Lian. Around there were whispers saying, maybe he was just feeling guilty, but Tgcf immediately raised his voice. That was the weapon of misfortune, the cursed blade. So I think this whole business is highly suspect. I'm envious that His Royal Highness has gained the Lord Wind Master's friendship to defend him, so Pei Ming said. Too bad our little Pei isn't as fortunate. General Pei, don't muddy the waters, Tgcf said. Can little Pei's case be compared? I saw him commit crimes with my own eyes, too, and heard with my own ears his admission of said crimes. Then isn't that exactly the same as today? Pei Ming argued. His Highness Tai Hua saw him commit crimes, and heard him admit the said crimes with his own ears. How is that any different? Tgcf grew furious and was about to argue back when Si Lian held him back. Lord Wind Master, thank you, I am in your debt. But please let this go. Tgcf himself hadn't thought of a good comeback against Pei Ming yet, so he only pointed at him. But no more words came out. Finally, Jun Wu spoke, his tone tranquil, everyone, please calm down. His voice wasn't particularly loud, very serene, yet everyone within the great martial hall heard his words clearly, and they all stood back in position. Once the hall quieted down, Jun Wu spoke again. Tai Hua, your actions have always been impulsive. When situations arise, one mustn't be rash, listen calmly, assess, and then evaluate once you know the whole story. Lang Qianchu lowered his head to heed the lesson. Jun Wu continued, Xianlei refuses to give us that full story, so his request for banishment is denied. He will be detained in the palace of Xianlei, and I will personally interrogate him afterwards. Before then, the two of you shan't meet. It was a conclusion no one had expected. Junwu actually shielded Si Lian, the laughingstock of the three realms, who had no temples, no devotees, and no merits. Lang Qianchu was the martial god who ruled the east. If he was unhappy with the verdict, then what a losing business. Even then, Junwu chose to shield Si Lian. Didn't that mean he was still very much in favor? Many of the officials now saw where the wind was blowing, and decided mentally that from now on, they wouldn't publicly mention the words laughingstock of the three realms. Xuan let out a sigh of relief and loudly praised Junwu for his wisdom. Lang Qianchu, on the other hand, only stared at Si Lian intently. Whatever the Lord wishes to question, go ahead and question, but whatever the conclusion, I will still duel him. With that, Lang Qianchu bowed to Junwu before he turned and left the hall. Junwu waved his hand and a couple martial officials came forward to take Si Lian away. As they passed by Shi Qingxuan, Si Lian spoke in a soft voice, Lord Windmaster, thanks for everything. But if you must help me, don't say any more on my behalf, but can I ask you to do two things for me? Shi Qingxuan was still feeling bad about fanning the fire that burnt down Paradise Manor, and wished dearly that Si Lian would ask him for anything. Whatever you need. The boy I settled in the side chambers, please take care of him, Si Lian said. Nothing I can't do. What's the second thing? Shi Qingxuan said. If General Pei still wants to make things difficult for Banyu in the future, please help her out. Of course, Shi Qingxuan replied. I won't let Pei Ming get his way. Where is she? I've hidden her in a small pickle jar in my Kuchi shrine. If you have the time, please air her out. Sometimes, Si Lian said. After thanking the Wind Master, two heavenly officials brought Si Lian to the palace of Xianlei before courteously excusing themselves. Thanks for your hard work. Si Lian bowed his head slightly. Stepping through the front gates, Si Lian closed the doors behind him. Looking around, as he expected. Not just appearance-wise, even all the facilities were exactly the same as his previous palace. Last time he passed by, he didn't enter, never having guessed that the first time he was to step foot in here would be due to detention. Not the best sign. But after so much excitement in the past few days, his heart was tired, and Si Lian passed out. Immediately on the ground. He dreamt of many things. He seemed to be meditating with his eyes closed, when he blinked his eyes open, he found himself sitting in the lotus position before a desk, his black robes flowing on the floor in layers around him, and on his face there seemed to be a cold, heavy mask. When he lowered his head, the side before him was of a young boy sprawled over the desk. The boy appeared to be 14 or 15 years of age, his attire distinguished, his form strumming with life, but fast asleep. He shook his head and walked over. Bending slightly, he knocked on the desk, Your Royal Highness. Maybe it was because of the cold mask, even his voice was cool. The boy finally woke with a start. When he raised his eyes and saw him, he sat upright immediately in horror. G Guoshi! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! He said, You fell asleep again. Copy the ethics scripture 10 times as punishment. The crown prince cried in dismay, "Master, please no. Why don't you have me run 10 laps around the palace as punishment? Copy 20 times. Do it now, and ride nicely." The crown prince seemed to fear him, and sat up properly to start writing. He then sat back at his original position and continued to meditate. Truthfully, everyone in the palace was a little scared of him. But this sense of distance and oppressive power was created intentionally by him. However, this crown prince may be too young, so he could never hold that sense of fear for long. Not long after he started copying the scripture, he called out, "Master." He put down the book in hand. "What is it?" "I've become skilled in all the sword techniques you taught me last time. Isn't it time for a new technique?" The crown prince said. "All right. What do you want to learn?" He said. "I want to learn the technique you used to save me." The crown prince exclaimed. He contemplated for a bit and said, "That one?" "No." "Why?" the crown prince asked. "That technique is impractical. At least, it's unsuitable for one in your position," he explained. The crown prince didn't understand. "But isn't it convenient? Using one sword to dissolve the power of 2. You saved me with that technique." It was normal for the crown prince not to understand. He said, "Your Royal Highness, let me ask you a question." "Ask." He said. "Once, there were 2 people, eyes sunken red with hunger. They started fighting in order to rob each other of food. In came a 3rd person, and he wanted to stop the fight. Do you think words would be effective in this situation?" "No, it'd be useless. They only want food, right?" "That's right. Because the root of the problem wasn't solved, no one would listen to your reason. Thus, the only way this 3rd person can stop the fight would be to provide what they wanted. To give food from his own purse." The crown prince seemed to understand, but also seemed to not. He continued, "The reasoning is the same. You must understand that the moment a sword is unsheathed, someone will be hurt. When power is released, something must receive it. Thus, it was wrong for you to say I dissolved the force of 2 swords. Nothing was dissolved, I absorbed their attacks. To stop an attack by hurting oneself is a foolish technique, and only used when there are no other alternatives. You're an esteemed crown prince. You've no use for something of the sort." The crown prince continued to copy his scripture, but even after a while, he still looked contemplative. He asked, "Did you have any other questions?" After a moment of hesitation, the crown prince said, "One thing. Master, if the 3rd person didn't have enough food, then what should be done?" The crown prince continued, "If both of the hungry had gotten food, but wanted more, and fought harder because of greed, and sought more food from the 3rd person, what should be done? What do you think?" he asked. The crown prince pondered and said, "I don't know, maybe he shouldn't have intercepted from the start. The great hall was gold. Everything was golden. However, at present, it had all become crimson. At every golden banquet table there was sprawled a person. Their throats were pierced, their deaths tragic. His hand that held the sword wouldn't stop shaking. The stately king was covered in blood, his eyes red, filled with pain and hatred. Next to his feet was the dead body of the queen. His sword in hand, he took one step after another and walked over. When the king raised his head and saw him, he was dumbfounded. Guoshi. You! Exclamation mark. A severely cold and cruel sword struck. Right at the same time, he sensed something, and turned his head immediately. The young crown prince was just outside the door, standing amidst the corpses of guards. The boy's eyes were blank, as if wondering what he saw was reality or a dream. He took a step and almost tripped on the threshold, his mind lost. He pulled out his sword, blood splattered onto his black robes. The crown prince didn't trip on the threshold but tripped on the dead bodies on the ground. He rushed to the king's body, his voice finally returning. Father! Mother! Exclamation mark. Yet the king would never speak again. The crown prince couldn't shake him awake and whipped his head madly towards him, his eyes wide. Master! What are you doing? What did you do? Exclamation mark. Guoshi. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. It was a long while after before he heard his own voice, devoid of emotion. You all deserved it. Dash dash dash. Si Lian didn't sleep well, and rolled awake with a start. He sleepily rubbed his eyes and realized he didn't actually sleep that long, and didn't dream anything nice either. Good thing there was something on his chest that poked him awake. He sat for a while, then found something in his clothes after feeling around for it. He opened his palm and revealed 2 dice, the same ones from the Paradise Manor. A sea of red floated in his mind. The scene was blurry, but the crimson silhouette was clear as day. Watching him unmoving within that sea of red, Si Lian sighed. I wonder how much is left of San Lang's Paradise Manor. If I get banished again this time, who knows how much junk I'll have to sell or how long it'd take to pay him back, decades, centuries, if anything, I'll pay him for the rest of my life. Si Lian looked at the dice for a bit before clapping his hands closed, shaking them in his palms and tossing them to the ground. The dice rattled and rolled around the ground before coming to a stop. As expected, all the luck he borrowed from Hua Cheng was used up. He was hoping for another roll of 2 6s, but it was only snake eyes. Si Lian couldn't help but laugh. He shook his head, and suddenly heard footsteps coming from behind. He steadied himself immediately and packed away both the dice and his smile. The footsteps didn't sound like Zheng Wu. Zheng Wu walked with deep certainty, unhurried. Although Hua Cheng walked with nonchalance, often lazy, the aura of confidence and surety were exactly the same. This set of footsteps, however, were a little floaty. Si Lian turned his head around and was taken aback. It's you. The person before him was clad in black, his face fair and his lips thin. His expression was indifferent, maybe even cool. As a martial god, he looked more like a civil god. Who else could it be but Mu King? He saw Si Lian's startled expression and raised his brows. Who did you think? Feng Xin. Without waiting for a response, he lifted his black robes and crossed the threshold of the door. Feng Xin probably won't come after all. What are you doing here? Si Lian asked. The emperor detained you, and won't let His Highness Tai Hua come. But he didn't say I couldn't come, Mu King said. He didn't bother answering Si Lian's question. Whatever. Si Lian wasn't actually curious anyway, and didn't question him further. Mu King looked around the newly built palace of Xianlei, his eyes ending up on Si Lian. After some thought, he suddenly threw something at him. A blue shadow flashed in the air. Si Lian caught it with his left hand, and when he opened his palm it was a small blue porcelain bottle. It was a bottle of medicine. Mu King said apathetically, dragging around a bloody right arm. Doesn't look good. Si Lian held the bottle but didn't move, and watched him instead, discerningly. After his third ascension, there could only be one word to describe the way Mu King treated him: weird. It always felt like he was waiting for Si Lian to get booted for the third time so he could make sneering remarks. Yet now that Si Lian might actually get booted for the third time, he suddenly became friendly. And even came to gift him medication. This 180-degree change in attitude actually made Si Lian feel a little weird. Seeing that Si Lian wasn't moving, Mu King smirked faintly. Use it if you want. Either way, no one else is gonna come. It wasn't a smile without mirth, it was obvious that he was actually feeling pretty good. Although Si Lian didn't feel his right arm was in pain, there was no reason to just leave the injuries be either. That pat from Jun Wu was a quick fix, but it was better to have medication. Thus, he opened the small blue bottle and carelessly started pouring the contents onto his arm. What came out of the bottle wasn't powder or pill, but a light blue smoke. The smoke floated wildly, wrapping around his arm, its scent cool and refreshing. It was certainly a high-grade item. Mu King suddenly asked, was everything Lang Qianchu said true? Did you really kill all those Yong'an royals? Si Lian raised his eyes to look at him. Even if Mu King had been forcibly hiding it, Si Lian could still see a thread of uncontrollable excitement in his eyes. He seemed to be highly interested in the details of Si Lian spilling blood at the gilded banquet and continued his questions. How did you kill them? Just then, another set of footfalls came from behind them. The two turned their heads at the same time. And the one visiting this time was Feng Xin. The moment he entered, he saw Mu King in the main hall. Even smiling next to a crouching Si Lian, he immediately frowned with alarm. What are you doing here? Si Lian waved the little bottle in his hand. Mu King schooled his expression. He was just saying that Feng Xin wouldn't be coming, and Feng Xin arrived the next second. Not funny at all. This isn't your palace. What? You can come but I can't. Mu King rebutted. Feng Xin ignored him and turned to Si Lian. He hadn't even opened his mouth and Si Lian spoke up. If the two of you came to ask the same question, then I will give you one answer. There's no need to not believe every word I said at the Great Martial Hall today was true. Feng Xin paled. Mu King hated that expression, and said in annoyance, all right, put that face away. After everything, who are you looking pained for? Feng Xin glared at him. Not for you. Get out. And who are you to tell me to get out? Mu King said. Speaking as if you're so loyal. How many years did you last again? Didn't you run away too? Veins popped all over Feng Xin's face. Si Lian could sense this exchange was going in the wrong direction and raised his hand. Hold it. Hold it. As if Mew King was the type to hold it back. He sneered. Everyone says it was because you couldn't stand seeing your old master fall from grace. What a pretty excuse. At the end of the day, you just didn't want to waste the rest of your days following a broken man. Feng Xin swung out his fist. What the fuck do you know? Exclamation mark. Bam. Feng Xin's fist landed squarely on Mew King's face. Mew King was a standard pretty boy, a bashing punch from Feng Xin was like a persimmon smashed on his face, bloody and miserable. Yet he stood his ground, and without even a whine, he punched right back. When the two ascended, they both obtained their own spiritual devices, yet at the height of anger, the best tool to release their rage was their fists. When Feng Xin and Mew King fought 800 years ago, their martial arts were at the same level. After 800 years there was still no difference. Each punch landed, the brawl was messy and mad. Each holding their own. Feng Xin cried angrily, "Don't think I don't know your nasty thoughts. The more crimes he commits, the happier you become." Exclamation mark. Mew King spat, "I knew you always looked down on me, what a joke. Look at yourself. What right do you have to look down on me?" The pot calling the kettle black. Lang Qianchu and Si Lian hadn't even started dueling, and Feng Xin and Mew King already started brawling. The grudges had been building for a long time, the fight was uncontrolled and riotous, each cussing at the other without hearing what was cussed back, and they certainly had no mind to hear anything Si Lian had to say. Si Lian recalled back when the three of them were younger, Mew King had been soft-spoken and well-mannered, and if Feng Xin had hit anyone it was all under Si Lian's command. And he'd stop when Si Lian said stop. Now neither was the case. Dragging his arm, Si Lian ran towards the door, hoping to call for help from any nearby officials, but before he even stepped foot out of the main hall, there was a huge loud bang that exploded from the front. Feng Xin and Mew King were also shocked by the large noise and stopped, their eyes alert, looking to where the sound came from. The front doors to the palace of Xianlei had been kicked open by someone. Beyond the door wasn't the expansive great martial avenue of the heavenly court, but a dead, deep blackness. And from within the darkness, innumerous chilling silver butterflies rushed out towards them. Next chapter. Ch.47, Raiding a Heavenly Palace, 3 lines to scare all gods. Silver shimmered turbulently, and without thinking, Si Lian's first reaction was to block with his hand the ruoye on his arm. If the situation called for it, would attack automatically. Yet those silver butterflies never charged towards him, and instead, flew around him to attack the two behind who were fist-fighting just moments ago. Feng Xin and Mew King suffered before at the hands of those wraith butterflies, knew how powerful they were, and didn't dare to be careless. They both raised their hands at the same time and cried, "Shield!" Millions of silver butterflies jetted towards them, flapping their wings like blasting winds, but there was an invisible wall blocking them, and the butterflies smashed against it like a thunderstorm, hailing and battering. White lights flared from the friction like sparks. It appeared that the two had cast a spell to shield, but even against a magical shield, the wraith butterflies were forceful and endless, crazy like moths to flames. Even with a spiritual defense, the two seemed to be pushed back by the relentless deluge of butterflies. A moment of carelessness and the enemy took the upper hand. If they didn't release the shield, the butterflies would push closer. If they did, there'd still be no chance for them to grab for their weapons. Both Feng Xin and Mu King mentally swore, gritting their teeth to hang on. Feng Xin took a glance and saw Si Lian was still standing where he was, his head lowered, and shouted to him, "Your Highness, don't stand there, come behind the shield." Yet when Si Lian turned his head, not a single hair was harmed. He frowned. "Ha!" The two looked closely and almost spat blood from angry shock on the spot. Si Lian had in his hand a wraith butterfly, looking rather confused. Earlier, when the butterflies were gusting through like wild winds, there was one that was a little slow and couldn't follow. It had flapped with difficulty in front of Si Lian. He thought it worked really hard, but the poor little silver butterfly couldn't fly anymore, so he extended his palm just beneath it. That silver butterfly landed on his palm, wings still flapping, but refusing to leave. Both Feng Xin and Mu King popped veins. "Don't touch that thing with your hand!" Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Just then, Si Lian felt a tightening on his wrist. Someone had gotten a hold of him, and pulled hard. His entire person was pulled into the darkness beyond the door. Yet, although he was shrouded in the dark, he didn't feel any alarm or insecurity. This darkness was like a layer of gentle armor. Not only did he not sense danger, it actually somehow calmed him down. Even if the person behind the darkness hadn't shown himself, with the silver butterflies, would it be hard to guess who it was? Mu King cried in disbelief. What impudence to come all the way to the heavenly court! What arrogance! A voice laughed. We're all the same. Wasn't the upper court impudent in my territory? Even if Si Lian already knew who it was that grabbed him, hearing the familiar voice from so close, he was still a little startled. Feng Xin shouted, "Hua Cheng, the heavenly martial emperor is here in the heavenly court. You let him go." Hua Cheng clicked his tongue. "Then let's see if you have the skill." As he finished his words, the giant doors closed heavily with a bang. Si Lian could feel Hua Cheng holding him tightly with one hand, taking him to an unknown destination. It was black all around them, and the silver bells on the black boots clinged and clanged in his ears. The ground beneath their feet was uneven. It really wasn't the bright, glorious roads of heaven, but more so a wild valley. Hua Cheng must have used the distance-shortening array to connect the front gates of the palace of Xianlei to some valley. But to connect the heavenly court to somewhere else using the distance-shortening array was no easy feat. At least, only a handful of heavenly officials could do it, so how had he done it? Si Lian was about to speak when a voice exploded in his ear. "Your Highness, where are you?" Exclamation mark. The angry roar came from Feng Xin. His voice was in his ear, but his person was not. It was all shouted within the communication array. Si Lian's eardrums hurt from the noise, and many of the heavenly officials were also blasted out, asking questions in fright. "What's going on, General Nan Yang? Did something happen?" Mu King entered the communication array too. "Bad news. Where's Ling Wen? Report to the Emperor, see." Lian's escaped. He usually spoke gently and courteously, but now his voice was laced with worry and anxiety. Ling Wen reacted immediately. What? I'll go to the palace of Xianlei to take a look. An official cried in shock. The loud, His Royal Highness ran away. Wasn't he detained in the palace of Xianlei? Exclamation mark. Xuan entered the communication array too. I just saw a bunch of middle court martial officials guarding the palace. You can only enter, but not leave, so how could he escape? Feng Xin shouted. He didn't run away, he was kidnapped. Your Highness, can you still hear us? Speak. Where are you right now? In that moment, everyone spoke, and they all talked loudly, each asking for answers. The mess of the Guoxi Fangxin and Lang Qianchu hadn't even cleared yet. Zheng Wu detained Si Lian, but the person in question was gone. Wasn't this starting more problems and gossip? Either way, they must find the person first, so Ling Wen rushed to check on the situation, to see if she could locate Si Lian. Feng Xin and Mu King were yelling within the communication array, looking for skilled martial gods to give chase, and Qingxuan released many more waves of merits. The communication array was in complete chaos, loud and tumultuous, to the point where Si Lian couldn't even get a word in. He took a deep breath and was about to tell everyone to calm down when Hua Cheng suddenly turned around, and two fingers came forward. Those cold digits gently touched his temple, and Hua Cheng laughed. Ha ha. Long time no see. How's everyone doing? With the soft touch of his two fingers, Hua Cheng entered the heavenly communication array through Si Lian. His casual greeting was heard not just by Si Lian, but all the heavenly officials hustling within the communication array, and they all fell into a dead silence. There was a silent uproar in everyone's minds. No wonder! Exclamation mark. Such arrogance could only come from that person. Hua Cheng continued, I don't know if you all missed me, but I haven't thought about any of you at all. There were indeed many heavenly officials in the heavens who secretly thought about him every day, but hearing that Hua Cheng didn't think about them at all, they all chanted heavenly blessings. Thank you. Thank you, please continue to never think of us. Then, Hua Cheng sickered. However, I've been fairly free recently. If anyone is feeling bored and wants to tussle with me, by all means, they're welcome to. Under the circumstances, his intent was more than obvious. If anyone is brave enough to give chase, I'll challenge them. It'd be a challenge they were sure to lose and have their faces sweep the floor. Wasn't this a blatant threat? Earlier, when they heard Si Lian ran away or was kidnapped, the communication array roared to life. It was after all a rare riot, and all cared deeply. Some martial gods were even ready to heed the call, prepared to give chase. However, with only 3 lines from Hua Cheng, all such passion disappeared. If Zheng Wu gave command to send whoever to pursue, then it couldn't be helped, it'd be official business. But this was something that just happened, everything was still a mess, so naturally no one wanted to bring trouble to themselves. No one wanted Hua Cheng to remember them. Thus, they all pretended they weren't present, but their ears were attentive to the development of this situation, their hearts anxious and shaking. This crimson rain-sought flower was overly fearless. To come all the way to the heavens. Just to kidnap, and the kidnapped was that laughingstock of the three realms. Was there some deeply rooted grudge or what? Silence befell the communication array. Only Feng Xin continued to swear, and Hua Cheng removed his fingers after making his speech. Don't mind them, he said to Si Lian. San Lang, Si Lian blurted, but Hua Cheng let go of his hand. We're too close to the heavenly court. Let's hurry, Hua Cheng said. His voice was low, and his tone was hard to discern. Yet his letting go of Si Lian's wrist was swift, almost as if shaken off. Si Lian was immediately reminded of the first time they met and how he evaded his touch. Si Lian froze on the spot. He originally wanted to ask Hua Cheng why he'd appear so suddenly, although he didn't think deeply about it. He sort of felt maybe he came to rescue him, so when he called out San Lang just now, he was a little happy. But with how Hua Cheng shook off his hand, Si Lian suddenly realized, why did he think Hua Cheng would come to rescue him? Never mind thinking whether Hua Cheng cared to follow his actions that closely. He'd only just escaped the ghost city after setting Paradise Manor on fire. It was more likely that Hua Cheng came knocking for paybacks, for revenge. Hua Cheng caught, imprisoned, and interrogated the Lord Earthmaster, who went undercover as a spy. That was the undeniable truth, but the fault naturally laid with the one who went undercover. Yet, he snuck into the ghost city, burrowed all over Paradise Manor to find said person, and set a fire. Even if, in the end, the reason Paradise Manor burnt the way it did was because Xuan fanned the flames. The first kindle in the armory was started by him. Others might not even have thought of setting anything on fire, so no matter what, Si Lian needed to take responsibility. The two walked one behind the other. The more Si Lian thought, the worse he felt, and the guiltier he became. San Lang, I'm sorry, he apologized. Hua Cheng suddenly paused in his step. Why are you apologizing? Si Lian stopped too. I went to the ghost city to investigate the missing Earth Master. I didn't tell you the truth, yet you treated me with utmost hospitality. But then I burnt down your Paradise Manor. I feel really bad. Hua Cheng didn't say anything. Si Lian also knew that I feel really bad really didn't amount to much, and felt even more ashamed. He lightly cleared his throat. But I reckon I'll be banished soon. After I descend, I'll for sure think of a way to repay you, see if I could. Why do you have to repay me? Hua Cheng interrupted. His tone was a little hard, as if he couldn't listen any more, and he turned around in a fit. Did you forget that my blade wounded your arm? I hurt you, not the other way around. Why do you have to repay me? Si Lian never thought his right arm was in pain, and even now he completely forgot his right hand was injured. He paused, then said, my right arm. My right arm's fine. It'll be better soon. Besides, it only became like this because I rushed forward to strike, so you're not to blame. Hua Cheng watched him intently, his left eye unusually bright. Si Lian suddenly noticed that he appeared to be shaking. After a moment, Si Lian realized it wasn't Hua Cheng who was shaking, but the scimitar aiming on his waist. That silver scimitar, hung upon the red robes, was shaking non-stop. The eye contoured by a silver line was also trembling. If it was the eye of a child, then this child, at that moment in time, must be bawling with tears.